Hello friends, today I want to help you understand what is a long-term rental agreement. So what is a long-term rental agreement? Is it pretty basic or are there some nuances we need to understand? Well, by the end of this video, you'll have a clear understanding of long-term rental agreements, and this knowledge will help you navigate the rental process with confidence and clarity. Have you ever thought what makes a rental agreement long-term and what terms are typically included in a long-term rental agreement? Have you ever wondered about the potential drawbacks or advantages of a long-term rental agreement? Well, let's dive in by first explaining what a long-term rental is and what components make up a long-term rental agreement. Secondly, I'll explain the benefits and challenges of long-term rental agreements. And finally, I'm going to talk to you about some of the strategies that will fit under long-term rental agreements. If you're ready, let's go. So in order to understand a long-term rental agreement, we need to first understand what is considered a long-term rental. For the longest time, long-term rentals made up a majority of the entire rental market. When people think of rentals, they're probably thinking long-term rentals. And they're probably thinking some of the traditional rental strategies, like renting out a home, renting out a condo, renting out a townhome, for you and your family. And this could be a single dwelling unit, or it could be in a like an apartment complex. All of those can be rented out over a longer period of time. And typically the renter's signing up for about a 12-month lease at least to be able to rent that place and stay there. And long-term rentals are a fantastic strategy. There are people that only do long-term rentals. Early on in my investing career, I owned a couple of fourplexes and an apartment complex, and I really like the idea of long-term rentals. But there isn't a ton of diversity in this strategy when it comes to long-term rentals, except for maybe something called a lease option. A lease option is a rent-to-own strategy that involves a long-term rental agreement, and it's typically 1 to 2 years. And the way that it works is this. When somebody is looking to buy a home, but maybe they don't have the means or maybe the credit history to buy a home right now, but there's a home they want to buy, they could put down an option, pay an option to buy that home at a certain price at a certain date down the road. So let's say they found a home they really like and they plan to buy it 2 years from now. That'll give them a chance to get their income history in place. It'll give them a chance to get the money in place for a down payment. They usually negotiate a certain percentage or a certain amount of the monthly rent they pay will also go towards the down payment, as will the option they pay. So over the course of 2 years, the people have a certain amount of money every single month they've been paying go towards the down payment. The option price they paid, as long as they execute and buy the home, that will also go towards the down payment. And at that point in the future, they're able to execute and purchase the home at the agreed upon price. But once again, that is falling under a long-term rental agreement. However, over the last decade, there's been some creative strategies that have popped up in regards to how long of a duration or a stay people can have at a rental. You have things now called midterm rentals. This is where people are staying anywhere between 1 to 3 to 4 months, and it's typically reserved for professionals or traveling nurses, people that are going to certain areas where their corporate office is located or a hospital is located, and they need to stay there for a certain period of time to get trained or to do the training or to maybe have a better understanding of the process of the organization they're working for. And then obviously you have short-term rentals, right, where people are vacationing. Rather than staying at a hotel, they're opting to stay at a home, a condo, or something extremely unique for a nightly rate for a certain period of time, typically less than 28 days. So now let's talk about the components of a long-term rental agreement. Well, first off, you have the lease term or the duration of the agreement. Now understand, this is going to be the battle that most people face when it comes to a long-term rental agreement. As a landlord, you want to try and lock up the tenant for a longer period of time, or at least as long as you can. And a lot of times the renter or the tenant doesn't want to be locked in for a longer period of time. So there's that constant pull of maybe it's a 2-year lease or a 1-year lease. But anyway, that's going to be the pull between the landlord and the tenant. But as the first component you need in place is the length or duration of the lease. The second piece of it is going to be a security deposit. When someone is engaging to stay at a place for a year or longer, a lot of things can happen during that time. There could be some damage that happens. So most landlords are going to require in that long-term rental agreement a security deposit. That goes into place in case any damage or anything negative happens to the property that you've caused, that they can utilize that security deposit to pay for. But many times, if you're a good tenant and you stay at this place and you don't do any damage, a lot of times you can get that security deposit returned to you, or it might be a portion of it returned to you depending on certain things that happen that would be detailed out in that long-term rental agreement. Obviously, you have the parties, you have the tenant, you have the landlord, you have the rental payment. How much is it going to cost you every single month to rent this piece of property? And also the cadence at which it's paid, and typically it's every month. and it's usually due on the first of every single month with a small grace period to be able to pay that. But after a certain amount of time, in the long-term rental agreement should also specify if there's any late fees. If it's paid after a certain date, typically the landlord is going to charge late fees, and that is specified in that agreement. Obviously, property information is important, the address and all the information pertaining to the property. And another important piece of a long-term rental agreement is the rights and responsibilities. This typically details out who is responsible for what, right? Usually significant maintenance, it's the landlord's duty. If there's something small or keeping it clean or other things that might be detailed out might fall on the tenant, but typically most of the things associated with a longer term rental agreement are going to fall under the rights and responsibilities of the landlord. But another thing that's specified in that clause is typically subletting, right? So if you're staying there and you're under contract for maybe 2 years, but something happens and you need to leave, most times landlords will not let you break your lease agreement, but they might specify that you can sublet it, meaning that you can lease it out to somebody else or sell your contract to another renter. And that's usually specified in the long-term rental agreement. And then finally, a component within the long-term rental agreement is termination. A lot of times this specifies what happens at the end of the term of the lease, whether it renews for another year or whether it goes month to month at that point. And I will tell you that having this detailed out in as much detail as possible is going to be really important, because I've seen a lot of confusion come where people thought that it was month to month after the year, and the landlord had in the agreement that it was an additional 12 months. So being able to understand that, make sure that detailed out in the long-term rental agreement is also very important. And just one last thing, there could be addendums associated with the agreement, like a pet addendum. If you're bringing a pet to the property, that might be an addendum associated with the long-term rental agreement that has specifications for what needs to happen if you do have a pet on the property in the premise. So there are a lot of benefit when it comes to long-term rentals and the agreements associated with it. And here are some of those benefits. Number one, typically you're dealing with one tenant on one piece of property, and it's over a longer period of time. Whereas with a short-term rental piece of property, you're dealing with multiple tenants, high turnover, and so you always need to be on guard. With a long-term rental, typically most tenants are fairly low maintenance. So if they're in there and they plan to stay there a year, a lot of times landlords are not going to hear from them unless something needs to happen or something needs to be fixed. Another benefit is consistent monthly revenue. You know every single month how much money is coming in from that tenant. Whereas with short-term rentals, you might not fully know that, right? You might have a really good month, but a slow month, right? So income could vary month to month. And although there can be some great months with short-term rentals, we've experienced with a short-term rental we have close to Yellowstone, where there are some absolute dead months. The month of November, except Thanksgiving, and the spring months are pretty slow up there. And so we really rely on that income that comes in from the summertime and during the winter when there's skiing or snowmobile season. One of the final benefits of a long-term rental is usually a very low vacancy rate. Because you're renting to one person for a longer period of time, you're going to have a much lower vacancy rate than maybe say a short-term rental. One of the aspects of a short-term rental that people really look at is what is the vacancy rate. That's going to help them understand if it's financially viable for them to buy a short-term rental, depending on what an average vacancy rate is for that city or that building or that home in a certain area. I remember when I owned a lot of long-term rentals, I could probably count on one hand for the 4 or 5 years I owned some fourplexes where I had any vacancies at all. So now that we understand quite a bit about long-term rental agreements, let's go over some strategy involved with those. Now, I mentioned this, it's typically a long-term rental is a great strategy for it, where you own one door or one piece of property or a single-family home, condo, townhome, and you put a renter in there for a longer period of time. Now, if you own multi-units like a fourplex, an eightplex, or something bigger, obviously you're renting out to one tenant per door, but for longer periods of time. That's the traditional strategy behind long-term rental agreements, is longer term stays. Another one that I mentioned was the lease option, which is fantastic. If you're looking to sell a property and the market is really slow, being able to put a renter in there that wants to buy it from you 2 or 3 years down the road is a great way to do that with a long-term rental agreement that just has some specifications about what price you're buying it at and when the closing date is, and some additional monies that will come in because they're paying an option to buy it from you at that price at a certain date in the future. And one of the final strategies with a longer term rental is something that is brand new on the real estate market called cohabitation or co-living. And this is where you have one property and it has multiple bedrooms and you're renting it out to multiple individuals. So you're renting out each bedroom, and a lot of times these individuals will share a bathroom, share a kitchen, share a living room, share a yard. But a lot of times I've seen this really pop up big time. I was at a conference a month ago and there was a company there called Pad Split. And they specialize in finding individuals renting out rooms in a single residence that has multiple rooms. And a lot of times you can make a whole lot more money, because if you think about it, A traditional rental strategy for a single family home that has maybe 4 bedrooms and maybe has 2 bathrooms, that might rent out for $2,500 or $3,000. But if you could rent that out for $1,000 a night to 4 people, instead of making $2,500, you could make $4,000. And I know people that are doing this, and I know companies that are popping up that are utilizing this strategy and putting renters in bedrooms. And I would imagine you're really going to start to see this grow over the next few years. Now, these are some strategies that I've seen work really well with long-term rental agreements and some of the components that make them vital that we must have if we're looking to engage in one ourselves. But I'd be interested in your feedback about long-term rental agreements. So comment below. Let's engage in a dialogue. And as always, just for stopping by and watching this video, I have a free gift for you. It's 100% free, no obligations. Just click on the link below, aaronsfreetraining.com. It is a short-term rental calculator that where you put in the price of the home, the income, the expenses, and it'll actually spit out to you, do all the work, and let you know whether it's a good deal or not. And it's 100% free, no questions asked. And once again, I appreciate you stopping by. Have an amazing day.